All right. Hola, hola, hola. Welcome, everyone. We're really excited that you chose to join us for our second annual How to Submit with Intention webinar. Um, we know that right now there's a lot of demands on your time, so we truly appreciate that you're here and that you're leaning into this space with us that we curated specifically for you as you undergo your application journey for the Graduate Student Fellows Program within the American Association of Hispanics in Higher Ed. Um, Today, we are going to walk through a lot of things together with intention, with a lot of clarity, and we have tons of amazing speakers, current fellows and past fellows who are going to pour into you all. And so we could go into the next slide, Sid, for our overview. Um, Immediately after the overview, I'll introduce myself since I'll be doing the third slide. I'll pass it over to my comadre Mitzi, who will be doing the following slide, and she can introduce herself then. And then we'll go right into our panelists' reflections. And I just really have to say, these are some of our most amazing current and past GSFP fellows. So we have three who are current fellows in this cycle, the 2025-2026 cycle. And then we have one who is a immediate past fellow. She was part of the 2024-2025 cycle. They'll be sharing their experiences, lessons learned, and what submitting with intention looked like for them. And then we'll wrap it up with a Q&A. We have lots of time for the Q&A, so definitely get your brains running, take down the notes. Because we really hope to have a really rich discussion with all of you who are attending and can answer any questions you might have during that time. So, like I said, we're super excited you're here. Let's go ahead and get started. Sid, if you want to share the next slide. I'll just start off by introducing myself. Hola, everybody. My name is Stacy Speller. I go by she, her, doctora pronouns because I was minted May 2025, graduated from Howard University, a historically Black college university located in Washington, D.C. I am Afro-New Yorican, very specific to the boroughs of New York City with my New Yoricanness, but also definitely understand and call out and live the Afro that lives in me. A lot of my research focuses on Afro Latinidad and bridging the gap between historically Black colleges and universities and Latinidad more broadly. And so I'll be going over the timeline and logistics. Oh, and I was a graduate student fellow, myself and Mitzi together during the 2024 cycle, I think it was, right? 2 years ago. And I'm the current chair for the GSFP. I'm with my co-chair, Sid, who's in the background, and I'm sure will chime in a little later. All right, so let's start off with logistics. For this part, I want to walk us through the timeline and logistics super slow, super clear, because I know that this is where sometimes a lot of anxiety can creep in, right? So our goal here is clarity in hopes of eliminating any pressures, okay? The application period runs from January through March. Before last year, the GSFP ran on more of an April to June application timeline. And what we heard and experienced ourselves was that this period can be incredibly hectic for graduate students. It's the end of a semester, the end of an academic school year, and often the hardest time to ask faculty for letters of recommendation, right? So we wanted to better align the GSFP with other national fellow cycles. So that as you're applying to one opportunity, you can more easily apply to multiple without having to constantly shift gears. So, moving the application window to January through March gives you a little bit more breathing room, right, during the academic year, but also allows allows us, the leadership, to select the cohort before the summer begins, which was really, really like big for us this past cycle. That matters because once you're selected, we want to give you the entire summer to gather any remaining documents to complete your onboarding materials and officially claim your fellowship position without rushing before programming begins at the end of September. So this timeline is really about like alignment, care, and giving you time to apply thoughtfully and also time to prepare fully when selected. Selections are made by June 2026, and then programming officially begins September 2026. We're really intentional about not over-promising timelines earlier than we can guarantee. So this allows us to get kind of be responsive, thoughtful, and fair throughout the review process, right? So we didn't really specify a date in June, but we will be done with selecting the next cohort sometime in June. Okay. So additional logistics, the GSFP is not a full year funded program like many other fellowships. What we do provide, though, is significant support and access, right? So our fellows do receive up to $1,100 as a stipend. The first semester, it's given as a $550 payout, right? Once you've submitted an invoice and a W-9. And then during the second semester, it would be up to $550 again, so long as you submit receipts and all of the conference expenses, because at the end of your fellowship, you graduate at the conference itself. So it is an expectation that you will be attending our annual conference come March 2027. And we actually want to pay all of your expenses, hence why we give the $550 refundable reimbursement come that second semester after you've submitted all your receipts for all conference expenses. So so we also provide structured programming, mentorship, and connection to a national community, including our national AAHHE conference. And then many fellows tell us that the relationships, the visibility, and professional development that they gain through the GSFP far exceed the financial component alone. So that's something that we're super proud of that we can, that we can cultivate. So our primary goal while we prepare you all as Latina, Latino, Latine, Latinx doctoral scholars for, yes, careers in academia, but also we want to be clear that we value and support fellows who are interested in administration, policy, and other leadership pathways in post-secondary education, or maybe not, right? Our trajectory, or excuse me, your trajectory does not need to look one specific way to be able to belong in this space, right? So, where we're going, as we continue to grow, we are deeply committed to broadening representation within the program across identities, across disciplines, across institutions, and lived experiences. So that commitment shapes how we read applications and how we think about cohort composition. So how we actually create the cohort, right? So here I want to kind of spend some time on understanding what our selection process looks like, right? We want to be really transparent about how we choose our fellows, right? Because demystifying this part is really important to us, right? Each year, the GSFP selects 12 fellows total. Typically, we receive anywhere between 80 to 90 applications. So we want to name clearly that this is a somewhat competitive process, right? That seeing that there's only 12 seats and we get almost 90 applications, right? But that competitiveness isn't just about like volume, it's also about our commitment to building a diverse interdisciplinary cohort, right? So for us to be able to do that intentionally, we think about the 12 spots in four very broad disciplinary groupings. Those are the four you see on the screen. We have a higher ed grouping, we have a K through 12 education grouping, we have social sciences, and we have STEM. Generally, that looks like about 3 spots per grouping, though it can shift depending on the application pool. Some years we receive more applications in education related fields rather than in STEM or social sciences. So this isn't necessarily a rigid quota, but it gives you an idea of what the intention behind how we go about selecting the fellows cohort. Okay. So what the structure allows for us to do is to ensure that we're selecting applicants, fellows that are from non-education disciplines, which is something that we are absolutely committed to doing because historically that's kind of what has predominantly been in this space. But also we want to ensure that our STEM, our social sciences, and our non-education disciplines, have a real opportunity to be selected. So realistically, you may be competing for only a few spots within your discipline, which is why we encourage you to focus less on trying to sound like everyone else and more on presenting what sets you apart within your specific context, right? So submitting with intention really means being clear about why this particular program, right? And why now in this particular moment, and why your voice and your work matters, especially when it comes to Latinidad and your discipline specifically. Okay. So before I close with this timeline and logistics, I just want to remind everyone that this session is being recorded and will be made accessible on our GSFP section on the AAHHE website. Please feel free to revisit it if you need to, especially as you continue working on your application. And as always, if any questions come up after today, please don't hesitate to reach out. We will share our social media hashtags, our names, and our Gmail account that you can reach out to. And we're more than happy to support you throughout the entire process. Thank you so much for spending this time with us. And I'm going to hand it over to Mitz. Next slide, Sid.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Mitzi. Again, I was in Stacy's cohort 2 years ago, so very lucky to be now a fellow alum. My discipline is rhetoric and composition. We study writing and the teaching of writing. So this webinar is really where I put my teaching hat on. Um, so one of the things that tends to happen when I'm reviewing applications is that I look at different trends that are going on, and then I share with you all some general advice as you're embarking on writing your applications. The first thing that I want to touch on is positionality awareness. I think that when we apply for fellowships, particularly mm, white-centric fellowships, there's this tendency to kind of follow those genre conventions. And so a lot of the applications we see will be people talking about the wide range of their previous fellowship experience. There's a lot of selling overall academic rigor and accomplishments, and all of that is good. It's just that our fellowship program is oriented in a different direction. And so you need to orient your application differently as well. To say that we are Latinos or Latines doing this work is not enough. What we're not looking for is people that are collecting accolades, right? What we're looking for is that in the understanding of your Latinidad, that you are doing work in your community, that you are demonstrating critical awareness, engagement, and purpose. So you can mention your positionality and who you are as a Latine, but that you also demonstrate to us what that means to you in the sense of your broader community. So again, a lot less about the collection of accolades and previous experiences that you have, because we know that you're all strong scholars. That's why you're applying, and more about the specifics of what you are bringing to the fellowship program as a Latine for our particular community. A lot of the applications that we see do not use the full page count. They don't use up the full length requirement. These applications also tend to be very thin because there isn't a whole lot of explanation about the work that you're doing, the significance of the work that you're doing, so on and so forth. So we would like to encourage all of you to really lean into and to use that full page count. Um, if you start running out of steam, if it seems like you're not able to say any more about the work that you do, often it's because you're not really explaining to us about what that work looks like unfolding in your own community, right? So, as much as possible, use up that full page count. And again, we are an interdisciplinary program. So, a lot of the times when people are explaining their research, their work, you lean into the terms of your discipline, but you're being read by a committee that's made up of multiple disciplines. And so a lot of the times we can't quite follow what it is that you're doing. A lot of the times we aren't able to identify that the conversation that you're participating in is very important in your discipline. There's a lot of like spelling out that you need to do. So again, like really leaning into who you are to be doing that work and how that work is going to benefit our overall community. Um, our letter of recommendation process, I think is very special. We've redone it in these past few years. You do not need to have a like person of academia to recommend you. I will also just name that a lot of the time the people that apply to this fellowship program are people that, you know, we're kind of the ugly ducks of our departments. And so we're seeking, I say we because this was me. So we're seeking community and support because it's not coming from the department. And that means that potentially who you're asking to recommend you isn't able to really speak about your work. So you are more than welcome and encouraged to find other letter writers, people in your community, people that you are at the protest with, your own students. Again, just people in your community that can really speak to who you are and who you are to be doing the work. So again, we're a lot less concerned with this like white supremacist, institutionalized, like academic rigor type of recommendation and more of like a true vision of who you are to be where you are at doing the work that you're doing. All right, go ahead and next slide, Sid. I'm gonna pass it off to our first speaker, Francesca. Super excited. Francesca, take it away.
Thank you, Mitzi. Hi, everyone. My name is Francesca Jimenez. I'm a PhD student in the Higher and Post-Secondary Education program at Teachers College, Columbia University. I'm super honored to be here representing as an AAHHE Graduate Student Fellow, and I'm so excited to share my experience with the application process with you today. So as it says on my slide here, I'm an Afro-Dominican and queer first-generation scholar from the South Bronx. My research centers on the experience of queer and trans students of color and how they develop intersectional identity affirmation and sense of belonging while in college. So to kick it off, to reflect on my process with applying for the AAHHE Graduate Student Fellowship, I'll note that like when I first learned about the fellowship, I really saw it as like more than just like an opportunity. I saw it like as a homecoming. So throughout my academic journey, which I'm sure a lot of people can relate to, I often felt like I was navigating multiple worlds, dealing with the hidden curriculum that I wasn't aware of, and I didn't really have a lot of opportunities to experience like any mentorship from scholars who like reflected my identities or the experiences that I was having. So the AAHHE Fellowship like really spoke directly to me as something that I've been searching for. And that search was for community, especially with other Latina scholars who understand the unique challenges and strengths that we bring to higher ed. Um, so as someone whose research is deeply rooted in examining intersectionality and belonging, I recognized that I needed to practice like what I study. And I needed to intentionally seek out spaces where I could belong as my whole self. So to share like what submitting with intention meant for me, I think firstly, I aligned my values with this opportunity itself. So it wasn't just looking at the fellowship as a future line on my CV. I really like dug into AAHI's mission and vision, and then considered like what their commitment is for preparing, supporting, and advancing Latina scholars. And that really resonated with me, especially the commitment to community empowerment. And so I was just asking myself, like, does this organization align with who I am and what I want to contribute to the world? And the answer was a resounding yes, of course. So second, I really aim to be as authentic as possible about my journey as well. I didn't want my application to sound like someone else's story. And then I drew from my lived experiences as much as possible. So I talked about, growing up in the Bronx, which, still to this day is one of the poorest congressional districts in the US, being first generation, navigating my multiple marginalized identities, all the things. And then I let my positionality, like Mitzi mentioned earlier, really inform my narrative, and talked about like my family's history, my violence I experienced in my neighborhoods, and how these weren't just like personal like struggles that I had, but really like reflects on the broader systemic issues that I'm hoping to address through my research. And then finally, I think that I really wanted to make sure that I connected my research to community impact. And so I tried to make it as clear as possible that my work or like future work that I want to do isn't just about like publishing papers, but it's really about creating like pathways for students who look like me, who love like me, who come from communities like mine as well. So I did my best to try and highlight the importance of that for me and like how it's connected to AAHHE's mission. And then other experiences that I've had that also are a reflection of that as well. And then I think finally, I tried to be strategic about showcasing my readiness. And so not just about like whether I'm a good candidate for this opportunity, but really like maximizing the opportunities that AAHHE could, what AAHHE can provide, and like why those resources are really important to me as well. Um, so I think what helped me overall with all of this is just starting as early as possible was one of them. So I really tried to give myself as much time to reflect deeply on why the fellowship matters to me, not just what it could do for me. I did also seek feedback. So I asked mentors, colleagues, to review my materials, people who knew my work, and could really like help me articulate my story as much as possible. And then made sure that my experiences were also reflected in my statement as well. And then finally, just making sure that I honored my community in my storytelling as well. So I think, yeah, that's pretty much it. I think overall, I think for everyone that's considering applying, just make sure that you think of it as just not just like submitting an application, but submitting your truth, submitting your purpose, submitting your commitment to community. The fellowship isn't looking like for perfect scholars. They're looking for committed scholars who want this opportunity to grow themselves and also to give back. So being selected was something super affirming for me, and I know that it's really going to be something that's like changed me like forever. And I'm glad to be a part of the fellowship and looking forward to continuing to support AAHHE grow overall. So yeah.
Thank you. On to our next speaker. Next slide, please.
I think Sid is frozen. I think
I,
her thing is lagging. But maybe Omar, you want to go ahead and get started until Sid
yep,
can get back with us. Thank you.
absolutely. Hello, everyone. So, my name is Omar Sanchez. I am a PhD student at The Ohio State University. My program is in kinesiology, and I'm focusing in adaptive physical education. I am a Mexican American first generation.
That's all
Can I
right.
keep going? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I apologize for that. So, just like Mitzi and Francesca mentioned earlier, um, being part of the AAHHE Fellowship, it has its many, many pros. And before I get into all of that, I do want to share that when I applied actually two times. My first time when I applied, I didn't get accepted into the fellowship, and I was a little heartbroken, right? But we learned from that, right? So I went back, looked at my application, and then this past year, I basically disregarded my first application, and then started again, right? But as Mitzi said, it was more of my positionality awareness and just like Francesca said also earlier, before I hopped on, the purpose of what I do and why I do it, right? So what I want to do is a little bit different, because I did apply twice, right? What I want to do is share what I did in my first application and then what I did in my second application that led me to be selected into the fellowship. Just please forgive me if I'm looking up and down. I do have my notes on the top screen, so you see me looking up and down, that's the reason for there, right? So when I first did my application A, that's the one I did not get accepted into. That was 2 years ago. I guess the overall tone and style was more like formal, structured for a fellowship orientation, which is fine in a way, right? But application B, which is the one that got me into the fellowship just now, it was more personal, emotional, it was story driven, and identity centered as well. So going on into the opening statement, which is like the interest, right? In my application A, I talked about, AAHHE's mission, their structure, and how my values align with theirs. But in application B, it was more of a personal narrative explaining the motivation, why I even decided to go ahead and enter academia into a PhD program. And I will talk a bit more of that into the connection to the mission as well. So in application A, the connection to the AAHHE mission was, goals to equity, social justice, and then Hispanic advancement in higher education. And as opposed to my application B, which again, and I'll share the little story with you too here right now, is I aligned it through lived experiences with disability, marginalized, and advocacy as well to disability. Um, and I guess this is more important as to why the purpose and your positionality, right? So I mentioned that my area of focus is adapted physical education, but that's also because I have a hidden disability myself. When I was actually I was still in the womb when this happened. We were involved in a car accident, and both my Achilles snapped when I was still in my mother's womb. I was a premature baby, weighing 1 pound 1 ounce at 6 months 3 weeks. So for the next 10 months, I was just on cast every 2 weeks, swapping them out, right? Um, Long story short, at 11 months, I had my surgery, and by on my first birthday, actually, I have a picture. I took my first steps. All right. So from there on, that moment, as I reflect going into, undergrad studies and then master's and now in the PhD program, I go back and reflect and really dug deep into why is it that I do what I'm doing, right? And it's because of my personal experiences. Um, I get to know how these students, these individuals feel, what they need, what they don't have, and what we need to provide for them. So that was just all in all, that was just my opening statement. From there, I did went and talked about my career goals. In application A, it was more like I would like to work at an R1 institution where, we do a lot of research as opposed to application B, which is still the same career goals, but I included more of a reflection of my positionality and the responsibility that I get to share with the Latino community. And with that being said, although the Latino community is a minoritized group within higher education, I do recognize that I'm not a minority as a Mexican American within the Latino community, right? So I have to use that privilege to help the Latino community. And how can I do that and why I should do it, right? So make sure if those are key points that you can reflect with yourself as well, be intentional about that. And I mean, when you look at those stats, right, about which Hispanic, Latino members are in higher education, then you could talk about this is where I stand, this is how I can contribute, and this is how I can help out. Okay. From there, I did talk about motivation, what motivates me to keep going. So I talked about research, interest, and social justice goals, which we see a lot with individuals with disabilities. And as an application B, I talk more about rooted in personal experiences and survival stories because of my hidden disability, right? Every morning when I was very active in um, high school, when I was playing football, soccer, and tennis, I remember every morning it would take me about 15, 20 minutes to even get out of bed because of my Achilles tendons that they ruptured and I had surgery when I was a newborn, right? So all of that is driven as to motivation as to why I should keep going. And previously I was a physical education teacher as well. So when I had to write my IEP plans or my 504s, I was very intentional about that because most parents don't understand what those even mean for their children. So even reaching out to the community besides your cohorts, aside from the PhD program, is what service can you do and what can you do as praxis as well. And this is why I wanted to attach that, right? So what can you put from theory into practice, which is praxis therefore. So if you have something to mention about your experiences in there, I think that would be very helpful. Um, and then just to close out, again, like personal voice and identity, application A, I kind of was hesitant to share more about my personal identity. It was like there, but it was controlled, right? Like I only let them know what I wanted them to know about me. As opposed to application B, I just like threw it all in. And then as you notice, as I've been talking, I talked about newborn. Actually, before I was born, I talked about when I was in the womb, a car accident, all the way until now, right? So it's lived experience, survival mode, why I'm doing what I'm doing, and why I care to do it and keep doing it, right? So I will close out with that. I think those are my 5 to 6 minutes. But if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to any one of us, and we can share our emails as well at the end. If you need anything directly to me, I'll be happy to share it with you. Thank you.
I believe, okay, Ellie. All right, go ahead.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. I hope everyone is doing great today. I want to go ahead and start off by saying, first of all, my name is Ellie Estrada. You can call me Ellie. Please don't call me Eleanor. Like, it makes me feel like I'm in trouble. I'm a PhD candidate. I come from the Department of Communication over at the University of Utah. But honestly, she has been around. So I end up collaborating and working with a lot of different departments, so including the departments of ethnic and gender studies, which have been consolidated recently at the University of Utah. Yay and also education, culture, and society. So that means that a lot of my scholarship and a lot about how I approach the world ends up being through interdisciplinary means. This sort of brief 5 to 6 minutes is just going to be dedicated to giving you a couple of tips that I think that you can use to go ahead and plug into your application. I'll go ahead and start with a brief about me and then give you 3 tips. All right. So first, brief about me. I identify as a trans Chicana, but a lot of how I approach the world is deeply rooted in communities and the communication by which communities understand their own belonging and situate their own belonging in, as a lot of other panelists have already said, in rooting. So that means I end up drawing a lot of my scholarship from women of color feminisms, rhetoric, and community engaged scholarship. I find a lot of these groups personally, though, in the groups of chisme, which means the language of chisme. I oftentimes phrase it theoretically and methodologically in order to understand questions about communities. But honestly, the reason why I wanted to go ahead and start with that is to emphasize that a lot about how we end up approaching the GSFP, whether we are queer scholars, Latina scholars, or scholars belonging to all kinds of different positionalities, it's that you're an intervention, not necessarily because of who you are. You intervene because of who you are, i.e., I'm not an intervention because I am trans. I intervene because, like Francisco Galarte says, trans cuts across disciplines. So I want to go ahead and give you 3 things to go ahead and consider with your application. First, punctuate your application. I mean this that we experience the world relationally because we are relational people, but we also experience culture relationally. As graduate students, however, because we end up approaching a lot of unfamiliar environments. I'm in a PWI, for example. As graduate students, we engage fellowship generationally, which means that as you are watching this video, as you are writing down these notes, go ahead and start picturing yourself in this fellowship program and see, is this somewhere where I belong? Can can you see yourself getting along with the colleagues who are mentioned here? I remember that similar to Omar and what you mentioned, I was also rejected the first time that I had applied. But rejection is also part of the formula and part of the narrative of success. I was rejected, but then I ended up sitting down and watching the original GSFP video for advice. And I think that there I was experiencing a lot of the generational qualities of the fellowship, which is trying to figure out how to trouble questions of Latinidad, for example. In Latinidad, there's a lot of assumptions, particularly for myself around queerness. And those assumptions can help shape your scholarship in a lot of powerful ways. But also, a lot of how we end up talking as fellows ends up actually being very geographical, as in, where are we from? And similar to what Stacy has mentioned, this is also a metaphorical question. Where are you from? Where are you going? These are really good intervention type questions because scholarship is created in the gap between what we know and how we know. It's also helpful to contextualize your discipline, like what are the big debates that are going around the discipline. I do communication, for example, but that's way too abstract. I seek to locate spaces, materialities, and narratives of local communities, but also I'm interested in brown trans communities. So try to imagine that elsewhere. What does your scholarship do? Second, flex your reflexivity. We're full people. Even before we enter the program, and we have been full people. You are an island, you are a mountain, actually, not an island, because our roots run deep. Similar to what Francesca says, reflexivity is key here. Many of the applicants who apply for the fellowship program perform a lot of complicated negotiations of Latinidad, but also belonging. Think about really bad departmental politics, disciplinary lines that oftentimes force us to not talk about what it is that we want to talk about. So in a lot of ways, low-key, we end up performing mastery. I'm thinking about when I was a graduate student at Cal State Fullerton, I was reading McKee and Delgado's Degrees of Difference, which is still an excellent anthology. And it pointed to a lot of contemporary trends around institutionalization and representation. Everyone knows about the 1% of Latinas who have earned their doctorate degree statistic. There were no statistics, however, on the amount of trans Latina or trans Chicana doctorate students who earn their master's, much less their doctorate degrees. That was a problem. So to mask that fact, many of us, we actually don't feel like we belong. And I would say that rather than shying away from that discussion and that discomfort, you should own that. Be unapologetic about how that belonging takes place and manifests within your own department, within your own discipline. Go back to the basics. A lot of us end up articulating return, right? Think about belonging as in being, as in longing to be somewhere where it is that you actually feel like you belong, and scholarship as repatriation, because many of us don't really come out of the womb wanting to do like affect theory, for example. We were already full people before we entered the fellowship, and you are going to be full people as you continue going through the fellowship. So continue making connections between scholarly bodies, communities, people, politics, and more. For example, within Latine and Chicana studies, there's already very little info on trans Latina communities, and that ended up constituting an intervention for myself. But the final tip that I have for y'all is a really simple one, which is practice. I tailored my application just like Omar after watching the GSF application video, and that ended up serving a lot of justice towards the application that would eventually come. I had an old speech and debate coach that used to say, practice and preparation prevent poor performance. And I really, really dig into those vibes. So I ended up getting people who really knew my work and were familiar with who I am as a person to write my letters of recommendation. And I ended up talking to people about what it would look like. And, before long, here I am looking at my picture right over here from last year. So that's wild. So at the end of the day, I want to go ahead and remind you that scholarly identities are very much a diva identity. You're performing. So try to figure out what it is that you want on, how it is that you want to perform, and where it is that you're going. All right. So similar to everyone else, I'll go ahead and just be available for questions if y'all had any. All right. So yeah, thanks.
Right. Good afternoon, y'all. It's a pleasure to be in community with you. My name is Danielle Aguilar, and I use she, her pronouns. I'm the granddaughter of Myrna Prieto, Maria del Refugio Aguilar, Jose Prieto, and Rafael Aguilar. And I'm also the proud daughter of Lorraine Velasquez and Antonio Aguilar. I hail from Ontario, California, and come from a mixed family with 9 children. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Colorado Boulder, in educational foundations, policy, and practice. And my dissertation uses both quant crit and community-based research to disrupt hierarchies of power dynamic found within carceral systems, which we can think of as things like schools or the juvenile and justice system. And as a scholar practitioner, my aspiration is to recenter historically disenfranchised voices and work towards social transformation together. So specifically for this panel, I'll highlight the why, what, how, and who of my GSFP application. And like some others have mentioned, I would be remiss if I did not note that I applied for AAHHE multiple times before being accepted as a fellow. So folks who are in that boat, you're in good company. So the why. I grounded my story in authenticity and identity. So I didn't just name my identities as labels or as a checklist, but I explained how these identities were lenses through which I not only viewed educational inequity, but also experienced educational inequity. So I emphasized, along with that, my personal motivation. So I described how my different lived experiences fueled my desire to pursue a doctorate and make my journey intentional and purposeful. My why was the foundation of my application. I wanted to show the selection committee that it wasn't just what I have done, but who I am and who I do it with and who I do it for. So the what of my application, connecting research to practice and praxis and community impact was huge for me as a community-based scholar. So I identify with terms such as scholar practitioner and praxis to show the practical and action-oriented approach of the work that I do. I mentioned that my research on carcerality and QT erasure, which within carcerality, as among my contributions to the work that I'm doing. And I note that I use participatory frameworks to put forth, elevate the voices of youth and families and position folks as knowledge holders who have traditionally within the academy been not only disregarded, but not even seen as part of the picture besides being extracted from. So I also explained how the work that I was doing aligned with the AAHHE mission and centered equity and collective work rather than just individual academic achievement. So that was something that was really important for me in my application. The how. So I was seeking to build comunidad, and part of that was addressing the loneliness that I felt in academia as a queer Chicana. I never necessarily, prior to AAHHE, have never really identified with other professional organizations because of my queerness and how I felt my queerness was taken up or not taken up as part of my whole identity of being Chicana. So I really steered away from those spaces. And like Francesca had mentioned earlier, it really was a homecoming for me for AAHHE. It was a huge validation to be accepted as my full self within that space. But I also articulated my future vision for wanting to be a mentor, right? Not just for people who were exactly like me, but people who had experiences on the fringes or not being accepted within Latinidad. Those were the people who I really want to ensure that wherever I end up as a faculty member, speaking it into existence, I'm able to support their pathway to see themselves beyond anything that they could imagine at that moment, and my desire to work at an MSI in doing that. The last thing I'll say is for the letter of recommendation, the second time around, I really approached it as a letter of love. And who could write that letter of love for me? So that letter was written by a colleague who I had known since 2012 as fourth year undergraduate students. We were both in our fourth year of the undergraduate experience. And we saw each other through our master's programs, through our professional experiences working in student affairs and higher education, and also through our transition into the PhD program. And now this person is a professor. And for me, that was really important to not just have a traditional letter of recommendation that was going to regurgitate my CV, but someone who really knew me deeply and understood why I was applying for this fellowship and why my personhood was going to be so critical to be a part of this organization. And I would say I really believe that all of those things together made a strong application for me. I want to keep it brief and brilliant because I want to make sure that we have time for questions. So thank you all.
All right, and we're gonna hand it off to Sid.
Sorry, for whatever reason, I felt like I couldn't share my screen and talk. I'm usually the one quarterbacking, kind of keeping stuff going, but I'm Sydney Caradona. I use she, her, ella pronouns. I just wanted to introduce myself real quick because I will be the chair next year. Right now I'm the co-chair under the great Doctora Stacy Speller. But yeah, I'm really just kind of want to echo a lot of the things that folks have said. Really, like everyone in this room, obviously besides Danielle, because they were in my cohort, like I can distinctly remember interacting with their application and like feeling their voice before I met them and like already being a fan before they were even a fellow. So really, I really liked Ellie's language of like performing, like you're trying to create fans among us. I think is like the kind of way to go about it. I remember Omar's narration and honest because that was similar to my application. I told the story. Um, I think those are impactful. So however you can kind of give us a sliver, an anecdote into who you are, and I'm big on letter writing, so I also loved how Danielle said like a love letter. Write us a love letter with your application. Tell us how much you love the work you do and how much you love the idea of being part of this community. And I hope that today, getting to kind of hear from some of the other fellows about the application, made folks who are attending even more excited about that potential. So yeah, I just wanted to make myself available. I'll definitely throw my email in the chat for folks who might have specific questions about the application cycle and kind of the intentions we're trying to move with the fellowship in general in really exciting directions. But yeah, just wanted to introduce myself and say I'm excited that to see there's so many of you here and it's me kind of responding to you in the Q&A. So yeah, keep throwing in some questions and we'll respond best we can amongst all of us. Yeah.
Also, feel
Thank you.
free to unmute. I don't know. I think can we
No, I think because of the webinar structure, we can't. So
okay.
if, oh shit, sorry, that was a B. Um, but there is, if y'all want to throw your questions in the chat, do you want me to share the pregunta slide or wait till the end?
Maybe share the contact information slide, so that they can have that information as they're thinking
Yes.
about.
And then
Yes.
we do have a question in the chat that our panelists can answer. I would like for them to chat before leadership does.
Sure. So
From
the first,
Joel.
yep, go ahead, Mitzi. You got it.
All right, can folks talk about how the fellowship has helped them complete their doctoral program?
Great question. That's awesome.
Panelists, you can take it away.
I
I
can
mean, oh yeah, you
go
want to
ahead.
take that, Danielle? Well, I was just gonna know, like, I'm still in proposal stage right now, so I can't say I've completed just yet. But I will say that this past semester and some change has really like made such a huge difference for me. Being like, later in the stage of the program that I'm in now, but I think that some of those key changes really revolve around the mentorship and community support that I've received from the fellowship. And so I think, like, for example, all the monthly workshops that we have really like provided a lot of guidance and just like information that I don't think that I would have been aware of without this opportunity. Just a lot of new knowledge that has been introduced to me that really like helped me, kind of zero in on how to shape, how I'm moving forward with writing my proposal and even digging a little deeper into my topic. So those have been so helpful. And then I think also just again, just continuing to emphasize the community aspect. because the process can already be a very like lonely one. And so I really love our like WhatsApp group where we kind of just lean on each other a lot for again like knowledge sharing information, but also just even discussing like more personal things has really helped with like being able to move forward with this process in a way that doesn't feel as isolating as it did for me before. So not done with, things yet, but I do think that it's really made a big impact on how I can move forward and eventually finish. So,
I can also go ahead and answer. I'm a little greedy, so I'm actually going to answer Joel Chavez's question as well as Maria Vielma's question. Okay, so on the question about what has this looked like for your own journey, I think that for myself, because at the time that I was applying for the first time, I had not even completed the prospectus stage, and I think that that ended up changing a lot of my attitudes towards my project, but it also ended up shaping a lot of how I wanted to approach the overall job market and started speaking more in interventions rather in terms of just like here's a couple of things that I've read, for example. I do think that it's really important to articulate, again, your discipline. Do articulate how it is that, like, your department culture has maybe affected you, or what are some of the places where you're sort of missing things. Because I'm thinking about mentorship, for example. I actually did not have a lot of, and I'm going to speak very loosely in terms of this word, access to a lot of other professors who look like me, frankly. I think that at the time that I had first entered my department, we had exactly one BIPOC professor. And I think that that was very difficult for me because it ended up being a case where I could not relate to a lot of people, it felt like. And so I ended up branching out and being interdisciplinary as a result of that. And so I do think that articulating your journey in terms of reflexivity is incredibly important. But the second question is, Maria, I really like your question around vulnerability because I think that a lot of my own scholarship ends up broaching the topic of vulnerability as it is generative. So I will say that navigating vulnerability is actually incredibly generative. A lot of how we are navigating the world right now is in terms of avoiding disappearances, is in terms of secrecy. Chisme, for example, is incredibly secretive, and that's partially what lends it its affective power. And so I think understanding the vulnerability as not just part of the journey, but as incredibly important to the way that you are approaching scholarship, to the way that you are understanding and learning methodologies is incredibly important. So when you're thinking about vulnerability, don't just think about it, but write about vulnerability. Why do you feel vulnerable? In which spaces do you feel vulnerable? And it's not even a sort of like politic of like, do you feel less vulnerable now? But how does this vulnerability maybe draw you towards communities and towards people who are willing to accept you as you are, whole as you are? So I think that this question of vulnerability, honestly, hold on to that. Hold on to the question about survival because the third world women of color have been writing about survival at this point for decades. And I think that if it's a generative question for them, it's a generative question for you.
If it's okay, I kind of want to coattail on that a little bit because honestly, the vulnerability question like kind of came from my neck in like the best way, I think, because for a lot of us, uh, there's the trope of like, oh, I have to like spill my guts to get this scholarship, right? Or I have to kind of create some kind of sensationalist narrative of like what I've been through. And for a lot of us, we don't have to build that narrative. We've been through a lot of stuff throughout the course of our academic experiences. And I want to say that the kind of notion of vulnerability is actually what switched for me with the first and second time I applied. The first time I didn't get in, I don't think I was actually very vulnerable in my writing. I think I tried to present myself in the way that we're taught to, of this is X research I do, this is X research I've done, and this is where I want to go, kind of, right? That's how we're taught to kind of market and sell ourselves in these writings. But the second time I told the story of being at AAHHE, which is the Association for the Study of Higher Ed, um, and people dogging me, people looking at my hand tattoos, people making their own measurements of my hips and my jawline, and my crotch to kind of assign whatever gender marker they can or racial marker. And I kind of narrated that. But then I told the story of someone coming up to me and saying, "Hey, are you going to the quince?" And it was the 15-year Latinx scholar dinner, and finally being recognized as that. And that was how I got looped into AAHHE, was at that dinner. But that's a vulnerable story. It's not one I like talking about. I don't think I've ever narrated to anyone else. Um, so I want to name that, like, in this space, you get to be vulnerable and invite cariño, I think. Where in other spaces, a lot of the times, yeah, our vulnerability gets taken advantage of. And I want to name that that's like a very real truth. And I appreciate this question a lot and where it's coming from. But I hope that, like, in this conversation, from what you're hearing, that vulnerability feels invited in this space. Yeah.
I
So
do
thank you for that,
also
Ellie.
want to speak really quickly to really both of those questions. I know that when I applied, I had a completely different dissertation. I had a completely different chair, and I was really going through it. And so the application sounded one particular way. And then when I was in my cohort is when I really opened up to vulnerability. And I was just straight up admitting that, like, I was the pariah of my department. Like, everyone was looking at me like I was the PhD student that wasn't going to finish because I was having a hard time. And within my own cohort, I could open up in a way that I couldn't open up with my peers in my department. Like with my department, I was always trying to like survive. And with my cohort, I could openly cry and be like, these people don't want me here. I think they're trying to kick me out before I can get my PhD. And opening myself up to like admitting that I felt like a failure as a PhD student, because it was very much coming from a place of like something's wrong with me. And my cohort was able to kind of rally around me and get me to the place of like, no, the issue isn't you. The issue is your chair, your department, these other things that are all aligning. And so that's how I ended up like doing a 360 and really like becoming a different kind of PhD student because of the support of my cohort. And I think that there's a lot of fellows that have that experience, that they're on the verge of quitting or being pushed out, and then Ahi kind of gives them the strength to continue. Yeah, so I think like the two questions that were asked really like link together.
I know this question was answered already by Stacy on the Q&A, but I can just add to the question about social media and only having access to LinkedIn. We do have like our LinkedIn group as well. So if that's the only outlet you have on social media, things are posted there as well. But I would like to say that I can even compare LinkedIn to Instagram as to my application A and B, right? So my application A is the one I got rejected. I would consider that's my LinkedIn, right? I put what I wanted people to hear and what I thought they wanted to hear. As is my Instagram, it's like my application B, the one that got me through me being authentic, myself, my positionality, identity. If you go to my Instagram, it's not private. Anybody can see it. I don't mind. I like sharing stuff. You're gonna see that my very first pinned post, it's actually my narrative of the story of the application that I got me accepted into the fellowship. Um, so I would say use your network, use the social media as like a power of networking. I recently went to a conference and the individual ended up looking at me through my Instagram versus LinkedIn, and we connected to that. And right there and then, I basically got offered a job. They just said submit your paperwork, and then we could take it from there. So, um, I would say be as active as you can in your social media outlets, because at the end of the day, the job that best fits you, it's gonna fit your unique needs and what you can bring to the table. So if that's something they could see through social media and how authentic you are, that gives you bonus points right there.
All right, we are at the 3 o'clock hour. I want to thank everybody who attended. I want to thank all of our fellows who participated as panelists. Thank you to my co-leadership team who helped host. Um, it's Black History Month, so wepa for that. This is the QR code. If you could just quickly answer the few questions, we want to know if this was helpful and maybe what needs to be updated, right? This is our second time doing this, so we're excited and we hope to keep on doing this. So with your feedback, we could make it even better. And if I'm not mistaken, that is the final slide. So thank you again for coming, and we look forward to receiving your applications in the March.
We do also want to share that we have
Oh yeah.
another webinar. in March. We're still kind of finalizing the date. But our last part of this three-part webinar series is going to be less like a webinar and more like a workshop. So you'll be able to come in with your applications, and then members of the leadership team will sit down with you and like help you write those things. We're very lucky that we have lots of like writing expertise on our leadership team. So please keep your eye on our LinkedIn, on our other social media, so that when we post for that final workshop webinar, you can bring your application materials to us and we can help you.
Thanks again. Adiós.